I'm either going to make it or I'm not. But I'm not going to say yes to someone that Satan tried to send me to fill in that gap and distract me and take me off course.
There's like a lot of peace in just knowing you've made the right choice.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know the outcome, that's one of the things I've had on my journey too, is just there's a lot of peace when you do the exact opposite of what the enemy's wanting you to do.
Yeah.
And doing the right thing and having no clue if there's going to be a payout for it. But just doing the right thing and being like, I know this isn't for me, no matter how lonely I feel, no matter how sad I feel, no matter if I think this is going to happen or not happen, but just knowing like this is not right for me, this is from the enemy and I'm not doing it, walking away, drop the mic.
Yeah.
Goodness.
I don't.
Okay, so today my husband Dalton is going to be sharing with you his testimony, not just of us coming together, but what that looked like as far as from the time that he got divorced and then that walk to the promise. Because his looks a lot different than mine, and we both think that this is going to be extremely beneficial to many people that are still in that waiting season, still dealing with maybe temptations or confusion. Maybe you came out of something really, really bad that left you broken, and now you're still trying to hold on to faith. You're still trying to walk that out. And this will be, I believe, very eye-opening, as well as just hopefully give you hope and understanding and rebuild your faith and just give you kind of that push that you need to get to that next step. So I'm going to go ahead and just hand it over. But babe, why don't you go ahead and just kind of tell them kind of from like a little summary of what divorce was like.
Sure. Fun times. 10 out of 10 wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, so there's a couple contrasts here between her experience in the Kingdom Spouse journey and mine. It's like a contrast of mountaintops and valleys. And I was at the bottom of that trench, and my journey was absolutely so different. And the fact that I'm here is just because the devil couldn't kill me, but he sure tried to shut me up quite a few times. And so this is kind of me sticking it back. So my journey involved a divorce that was less than timely. It was actually the catastrophic worst time that you could ever imagine it. It was 2 weeks before taking my national board exam, which is a absolute bear of a test. If it's something that you pass this test, you don't work for a year and you have no degree to show for it. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, which you have to start paying on. And in the middle of 2 weeks before taking that test, I am now having to figure out, what am I going to do in the difference? What am I going to do here to make this by? She left with the kids, and so there was no communication. It was absolutely just a nightmare situation.
It was just meant to break you.
Absolutely meant to just completely destroy me, and this was the intention behind it. Whenever we looked at how am I gonna, like, what am I doing in that 14 days, it was studying for hours and hours and hours, and then the times that I wasn't studying, I was now having to look up what legally is this even gonna look like. What do I even have an option to? I had to start looking for lawyers. I had to start looking for all of these things of trying to figure out what exactly is this whole thing doing? What rights do I even have as a parent? Is a custody fight? All of these things, and it was a struggle the entire way through the process. And so that's where my journey started. Now, in the time frame of when that kind of took place, this was right in the start of 2019, and so I, thank God, passed my test. Thank God, was able to see my kids a few times in that process, who at the time were 4 and 2. It wasn't not a good situation at all for anybody involved. And whenever we started that journey, I was yet again at a rock bottom. This was the second or third time that had happened before. Once was from an overdose due to synthetic marijuana. The second, obviously, being the divorce that went through it. And I thought at that point, how much worse could this possibly get? And it did. The furnace that ensued for the next 2.5 years is imagining just, Shadrach, Meshach, and off to bed we go. Furnace was up 9 times, and the only thing that was getting me through was the fact that Jesus was there.
Amen.
Now, the part in just in that aspect of that journey, lots of twists, lots of turns, lots of deceit from the enemy, a lot of taking the good thing instead of waiting for the great thing, getting impatient, holding out for that promise, because at the time I didn't have an end date. It was just soon. If you've ever been told soon by God, it's typically not soon. And so how do we go from where that was to where we're at now? The journey along that process, it involved having a background of having prophetic family members, having a prophetic church, having very spirit-filled men that were in my life. This isn't a dig at people like Andrew Tate or Grant Cardone or anyone like Weller or whatever podcast or any of these other people that are trying to show you what it's actually like being a man in today's world, as far as actually getting to where you're going those routes. You're going to end up with a lot of frustration, a lot of comparison issues. You're going to end up with a lot of insecurities,
and you're going to end up chasing money.
You're going to end up chasing stuff that doesn't matter.
You're going to be chasing money and chasing power.
No.
Yeah.
And so in that part of it, this was the second time I'd hit rock bottom at the absolute lowest points in my life. And I decided at that point, I am really bad at running this ship. So I'm going to let very, very few people have anything to do to say in actually helping me rebuild this thing. And so I let for the next few months overall was just spent in church. And it was church all the time. It was church at one of the pastors that I was very close friends with. He was there from the day after, basically the day after she left. I remember it was something that night, it was a Saturday night or Saturday afternoon that all of this just catastrophic things happened. Hadn't seen my kids, had absolutely no chance of making it through this day. And I remember the only thing that I wanted is that I wanted a hug from one specific person on Sunday morning who had just been someone that had just been a genuine mother figure in my life. It wasn't even like a dig at my own mom or dad or anything. Like, they already knew my struggle, but I needed to relate. I just needed to feel like it was going to be okay from someone that I'd trusted years and years and years ago. And I show up and they weren't at church, but the pastor was. And that's when it really started, that relationship with that pastor. He took me under his wing, and he started to begin to he was at my house all the time. I was at his house all the time. If we weren't at each other's houses, we were at church. And if I wasn't at his church, I was at our other church where we ended up meeting. And that's what my life looked like, because I was just, it was such a point where I was like, I need to have something work because I'm really bad at making this try to work on myself. So what we had is, over that time frame, things started to smooth out a little bit better. I was able to see my kids just a little bit more, very sparingly, and it was something that we had to fight for, that equal right. We had to fight for every single inch of ground was trying to come in at a time that there were no answers. I had no answers to why. I still to this day don't even know why she left. I've never really asked that question because it never really mattered. It was something that it was just completely broken, and I was broken, and I had to figure out how to fix myself. I had to figure out how to be there for my kids. Whenever the kids were there, I tried my best to just make it to where it was the best for them. Whenever they weren't there, I was in crippling depression, crippling anxiety. I did not leave my bed. I was smoking, was anything that I could do just to feel better. I had dropped my weight had dropped down 60 pounds, no, 70 pounds lower than where I'm at right now. And that was a point where I would stand up, almost black out. I would have to sit back down just so I could be able to stand up from the couch studying. It wasn't like it was a strenuous activity. I was studying and would stand up and black out. I couldn't eat, couldn't do anything. And that's just kind of to paint that picture of really how messed up that whole situation was. beyond that part of it, I started to have these encounters where we were actually going into the courts of heaven. It was a new concept for me up until 2019. I'd never even heard about it, never had any interest with it. And a few weeks after she left was Passover, whenever Robert Henderson was there, and that's whenever I was introduced to the courts of heaven. It was just something that clicked for me. It was just a way of communicating with things. It was like, oh, it's something that I don't even think about it now, because that's what I let rebuild me. And so every part of what that is, it's not a facade, it's not a product, it's not a recipe or an agenda. It's just a method of speaking to God in a way that made sense to me, in a way that He was able to communicate with me about those things. Through the courts of heaven, that's whenever I started to get introduced to that spot, that there was someone that God had for me and that she was coming. I didn't know when. I had no idea about it, and that's where the whole. If you've looked at the previous parts of our Kingdom Spouse, it actually led to confusion at the very end of it, because it was something that she had a different hair color than what Krista does, and it wasn't a physical. Attribute in the long run. It was how God saw her in the spirit, and that was something that didn't come until pretty much the finish line. But this is way at the start of this. This is years and years in advance of this. And so my whole part was like, God's sending me someone, but I'm going to help him out, because I'm really good, really good at making that happen. And in this journey, it ended up being a spot where I dated a witch. I dated someone that was completely the other side of the political spectrum for me. I dated someone that
Did you meet
was
her online?
Yeah, online dating. So if any of y'all are there, I'm pretty sure he's not going to come on there, or she. Not to say it hasn't and it couldn't.
What made you decide?
My God, that was just an absolute nightmare situation. Start to finish. If you want to feel depressed, anxious, worthless, ghosted,
chipped away,
completely
dehumanized,
insignificant, measured up only by your successes or the ones that they can see, how tall you are, how much you weigh,
how much you make,
every single thing that, and most of you don't even have control over. You can't change half of that stuff.
Poor guys. And women. It's hard.
It's an absolute just cesspool. It's just garbage. But here's the part, is that's where I thought I'm going to help God bring her into the pasture.
Sure.
And each one of those times, it's like, God, I don't know if this is getting any worse. And boom, you match with another one, and then you go down even farther.
Satan's perfect match.
Yeah. And in that process, I met the one that we were talking about, being the witch. But it was something that at that time of it, that was Satan's best option. And this wasn't a, by everything in the world standards, she excelled at and went beyond it. And in everything that I had spiritually was the absolute opposite of what she believed in. And Satan actually used her to try and get me off my path by actually talking with me about a dream that I had shared with nobody. It was so specific that as she was telling it, I was showing her in the physical house where we're at right now. I was showing her where that dream happened and took place, walked her through it, and actually filled in the pieces. But the part that the devil added to that was the finish of that story. The finish that was there was the only thing that stood out. It was the only part that hadn't been confirmed by at least 2 other people who had had that dream up until this point. And they were the only 2 or 3 people that we ever knew. We never talked about this. We never spoke about it. It was just something that was for us personally. And that was what Satan used through a familiar spirit to be able to give her that information, to try and bring her into this spot to deceive me. And so that was the part spiritually. It was kind of saying that, well, obviously God's doing something new in this season, and he's about to radically pull her out of this situation, and then that's going to be where we're going. And I could actually see that in my own carnal mind, and that was what Satan used to continue that level of deceit and just take me in an entire whirlwind of witchcraft. And not me practicing personally. I've never practiced witchcraft. I don't have any toleration for that part of it. But it was something of thinking God that was going to turn a diamond out of a polished turd. And spiritually, that's where it was. And had any of these situations come to pass, it would have bankrupted every single thing that I stood for. every single thing that she had been praying for,
Would've destroyed your
everything
family.
would have destroyed the family.
Oh my gosh.
It would have destroyed relationships with my children.
We
It would have wouldn't have anything of what we walk in now. It was the attempt to try and dismantle me, because God couldn't, or Satan couldn't kill me, so he tried to do the next worst thing by disabling me. And this was that spectrum. That's where I lived. I lived in that furnace for years. And so as we were going through that part of it, ended up breaking that off, and that's whenever I was actually heading down to Arkansas to see her at one point, and I knew it was going to be something that was going to end up just messing things up. And God actually sent me the blessing of a double flat tire.
The funny part to that is actually your mom prayed that it would happen, and like 2 seconds later.
Yeah. She's like, don't let this come to pass. And as soon as I leave, I take the first corner out of the neighborhood, and I get a double flat tire. So, not going to Arkansas that day.
If anybody's had a double flat tire, leave it in the comments.
Yeah, if you've had to be sobered enough to get a double flat tire, this is probably for you. But that's kind of the tone of what that journey looked like for me. And so as we were going through that part, it just ended up being that I never learned from that situation. That was the one area where I felt like I wouldn't let surrender to God, because I gave him the opportunity to control the finance. I gave him the opportunity to have reign in the household. I gave him my time and all my free time and spare time that I had. What wasn't working, it was in church. If God was going to bring somebody, it was going to be in that situation. But the part of it was, the thing I never relinquished was my own personal wants and desires, and that part of it of actually seeking someone that I thought would fill that role. And that was the spot where I thought I knew best. From there, it was a really kind of a hard time to really started to deal with. And that's kind of what happens when you become emotionally involved or physically involved or mentally involved with someone that you're not supposed to be with, is that you start letting the enemy have those basically unravel every single thread of what you've been holding on to. And it starts by dismantling every promise that you've started to have for you, that God's had for you, is by you trying to chase it in your own strength. And so as we're going through that journey, and she's out of the picture, and then another's out of the picture, and these are all from people that are online, like just being selective on that online dating and thinking that this was going to be what's happening. I'm going to help kind of bring this, because I was impatient, and I lonely, incredibly lonely. And whenever the girls weren't here, the house was quiet. That had never been quiet. And the fact that it's something of having to kind of deal with what do you do in silence and solitude is really going to be what you're kind of determining your trajectory.
Absolutely. It's a really good point.
And so as we're going through here, God was sending me these messengers, and just sending me dreams, and sending me interactions and experiences within the courts of heaven, as being able to actually see what was going on in the courts of heaven as I was praying. And it radically changed my prayer life, but I let God build me up from the ground floor. And I felt like I had to actually be taken down to rock bottom before I would actually surrender it all. And I didn't learn for a few more times that this is just something that this is just not going to happen, to the point where I felt like I'd missed it. And I felt like I'd messed it up so much in that process, in that waiting period, that God was like, no, this isn't something that you're going to make it, because you don't qualify. You're not going to be something that actually makes it to that finish line. You messed it up. And it wasn't God saying that, it was Satan saying that. But I gave Satan those permissions by going outside of God's will and pursuing these leads, these women in any way, and even in just having someone to communicate with, someone to talk with. And it got to a certain point where I was like, I'm just completely done with this whole dating thing. I'm done with online dating, all of these other situations, which thank God that happened a couple times, but it's sad that it kind of had to happen multiple times. I was like, no, it's not a me problem, it's the dating app problem. So I download a new one, and then here'd come another horrible just encounter. And I'm like, no, it's not on this one. We'll find it. We'll find her here. She's hidden on the Christian one. And then that was a disaster. And then, in this, just at that part where you're just chasing your tail, and you're just so desperate to make something happen and see it be different, that you don't realize that you're just delaying everything. And that's where I feel like that's the reason why she had to pray so long, wasn't because God was trying to make her wait, but because I was the one in the process that wasn't surrendered to that part of it yet. And that's what a kingdom spouse takes, is that you have to have both surrender, that will and that chance that God knows you better than you know you. And God has everything planned and lined up. And it's a part where every single one of those expectations that you think you're trying to find and help make that happen, God exceeds it in every way, shape, and form. And it's not even the most way. It's something that you're not having to pick up, and you're not having to pick up the slack. You're not having to, you're not having to train and teach. You're not having to do all these things. They're on the same page with you. And that's really kind of the big part of realizing it, is that the reason why I didn't pursue many of the other people that were on those apps, because none of them were on my same page. And that's kind of that spot in the spirit where I knew enough to be a good sinner, but I knew that it wasn't I knew that the season wasn't the time for me to be able to have to encourage and build up and help motivate and get people up to speed with where I was at. And this was, it wasn't really a holier than thou moment. It was just something that I understood from going through months of going through those depths, really the extent of what God was having and calling me to. And it was something I really didn't understand the fullness of it at the time, but I knew that it was something that didn't involve having to teach and raise and do all these other things to get the person that was supposed to be with me on my same page. And where it wasn't going to be something that, and it was that confirmation of whenever you're dealing with people that are unequally yoked, that don't have your beliefs, that don't have your core systems, that don't have your core values, you're not going to change the opinion of a single person if it's something that they don't have that opening to be able to allow for it. And every time that you're trying to address that, it's something that comes as an attack if it's something that you're having to do it and God didn't lead that discussion.
And if you try to do it, you end up exhausted and worn out, and the enemy loves that, because when it actually comes time to move, you're done.
Yeah. You're
exhausted, you're worn out, because you spent all of your time in strife trying to convince somebody of what you know, and they have zero interest in it.
Yeah, and exhaustion's really the key point there, and that's the name of the game, is that perseverance is what it takes. And every single thing that you open yourself up to allows the enemy to try and just bleed you dry just a little bit at a time, so that by the time that you get to the end of that, the last 4 months, and that's where I was at, I had absolutely nothing left in the tank. Zero. Not even, this was to the point where I was even considering leaving the church. I was even considering, it was something I was like, this is so bad. So bad. We had a bunch of family problems that kind of popped up at the same time. Had a couple deaths in the family that happened in this time frame. And it was just the nightmare situation just kept going farther and farther and farther and farther away from where I felt like God was actually wanting this situation to be, which was why I felt like I'd missed it. And so at that end of it, where I kind of finished those last 3 or 4 months, it was, I didn't want anything to do with a relationship. I had kind of come to the point where I was like, nah, I'd rather be single than take anything as far as a second best would go. I don't want to finish with a second place. I'm done with second place stuff. I'm done with any of these kind of this thought process. It's literally first place or nothing. It's not something that we're going to settle for. Well, I'm just going to land somewhere in the middle and hope we just end up finishing somewhere. It's like, if it's not something that's the best, I don't want it. And that's kind of where I had to get to, where if it was something that if it's something that I feel like God had something better for me, he's not going to say, I wanted to bring you something better, but you didn't let me. I had someone better for you. I had something better for you, but you were so caught up in your own ways that you never let me enter into that space. You never gave me the control over that area. And I wanted so badly to have that for you, but you didn't let it happen. And that was the last time I had heard that. I'd heard that once before with God, that he had something better for me, but I had missed it because I wouldn't let him bring me anyone that I had better. And this is something where a lot of the consequences that I dealt with were because I was just trying to make these choices just to try and survive at this point. I had gone from the start of that journey in church all the time to the end of that journey was, I know I'm not going to meet someone that's going to try and deceive me, because I know everyone in a bar is not going to try and deceive me. I know exactly where that spirit's at. And I was drinking with lesbians because it was a group of people that I felt actually safer around, because I knew there wasn't any mixed intentions. It wasn't something that was going to cross over anything. And it was something that they were actually some of my best friends at the, in that last few months, but the best friend in that category was still something that they lived in a bar all the time. They were wanting to go and do all these things all the time, and I was so just bored and lonely and depressed, feeling like I'd missed what God had for me, that's really just where I was at. And so that's where I went. And in the faith aspect, I didn't have any reserve left over. Zero, like absolute zero faith extra for holding out for a promise that God had for me as a maybe down the road. And so it wasn't really until that last 2 months that the word came where she's going to be here by the end of spring. And I at that point I was like, I'm just gonna hold on long enough. At that, in that season, in that last 2 months, Satan tried to bring the witch back into the situation again, just in a completely random coincidence, walking in the same place in Arkansas, nowhere even close to where I live. But it was something that, seeing that and bringing all of those emotions kind of back up to the forefront, and then having to realize, if it's something that I pursue that in any way, I know it's going to be something that leads to dating. It's going to lead to whatever, and I know if I go in that route, I'm gonna for sure miss it. And so at that point, I said no to that. I didn't pursue any part of it, and that's whenever I had that realization that that's the best of what Satan could ever send, that I would even ever have the chance of even ever considering saying yes to anything. Like, that was it. That was the Hail Mary toss. And at that point, there was actually a lot of peace that came over me, because I realized that I'm either going to make it or I'm not. But I'm not going to say yes to someone that Satan tried to send me to fill in that gap and distract me and take me off course.
There's like a lot of peace in just knowing you've made the right choice.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know the outcome, that's one of the things I've had on my journey too, is just there's a lot of peace when you do the exact opposite of what the enemy's wanting you to do.
Yeah.
And doing the right thing and having no clue if there's going to be a payout for it. But just doing the right thing and being like, I know this isn't for me, no matter how lonely I feel, no matter how sad I feel, no matter if I think this is going to happen or not happen, but just knowing like, this is not right for me, this is from the enemy, and I'm not doing it, walking away, drop the mic.
Yeah. I don't. All right, let's go ahead and land this plane. So that's really funny. So having the peace and being able to say no to the best thing that Satan could send you actually brings a lot of peace and comfort. And it was something that I really wish along that journey that I had the spiritual discernment, that I had all the other things of what I have now, to be able to kind of say, I could spot a fake from a mile away. I can look at you. I can see exactly your intentions. I know in the spirit what's kind of leading in this situation. But at the time frame, I didn't have that. And honestly, I feel like I probably had to go that because a lot of you might also have been going through that. Which that's just a part where
that is where God trains you up.
You just learn in the mistakes something that you can fail safely.
Right, and then it helps you so much in the rest of your life. It is so hard and so awful, and nobody wants to walk that. But however quickly you learn it, when you kind of walk through that season, like the knowledge, if you take that and you actually say, I'm going to learn this, I'm going to dodge these bullets, I'm going to walk away. You learn that discernment, because now you can't mess with him.
You can't really take that away
he
anymore.
He can read you,
And there's a spot to it when we look at it. And one last thing in that kind of closing thought is that whenever you're taking a test in life, if you already know the answers, the test stops. And it's something that sometimes in that process you have to kind of figure out some of those answers of what you're going through. And some of those are really messy. Some of those hurt quite a bit. Some of those hurt you and other people around you. But there's a part of it that once you've learned those answers, it's really hard to kind of have that mistake kind of come up where you're saying, I'm going to repeat that again because I already know what the end result of that is. The faster you learn the answers to the test, the quicker the test ends. And I feel like that a lot of people, whenever they're in that spot, how do you reach the finish line? You have to keep going. You don't have there's no chance. What other option is there?
Yeah.
You keep going, and regardless of what God has for you, or regardless of what He's called you into, or who He's bringing into your life, or who He's taken out of your life, there's a part of it that being able to just kind of go with that flow of what God has for you is really that key here. And that's what we do now. We just kind of go at God's pace, and we just try not to make anything happen in our flesh anymore. It's a lifelong struggle of walking that out, but we just wanted to kind of go through a little bit of what my journey looked like, and the whole thing with the mic drop was really funny. But I'm really just happy. We're looking to start kind of building this content here, because I'm, as much as it's kind of hard to kind of get some of these things going, I think it would be beneficial to go ahead and start a discipleship course to actually start what it looks like, how to actually go through the practical steps of building yourself up from the ashes. How do you actually go from where you're brought down to the dust? How do you go back into life again? So we're looking forward to seeing you guys again. Hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, or whatever you guys are watching this. We hope you guys have a great time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.